as Professor Temengo was saying, right when you're getting into the 1950s, there's the whole Emmett Till case. Later on in that same year as Emmett Till, there was the Montgomery bus boycotts had begun. Rosa Parks. This is the 1950s now, so all over the world you're having people becoming more conscious of the world and of the way in which they feel like they need to gain their political rights. At a time when, a decade before, we had just fought World War II. And World War II was about what? Liberating Europe from the invading Germans. World War II was supposedly about liberating some of these Southeast Asian countries from the invading Japanese. So if we're so about liberating people from invaders, how is it that the same people we are liberating have their own colonies in Africa and Asia? How is it that these same people that are the liberators are colonizing their own 22 million black people here in this country? So people start to wake up all over the world, and this is one of the things I kind of mentioned last time. In the Caribbean, in Africa, in Asia, in the United States, black people, brown people all over the world started to realize they had a common narrative, and they started to come together on that basis. So this is where you start to see the civil rights movement come about. But the civil rights movement, mostly recognized as being led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was a movement of integration. It was a movement towards assimilation. But on the other side, you had some people that weren't necessarily considered integrationists. They were considered separatists. Someone like Malcolm X. Malcolm X got a lot of his ideals from Marcus Garvey, who was a Pan-African black nationalist from the 1920s. Malcolm X was part of the Nation of Islam, an organization that was started in the early 1930s. And it was an organization that believed that the white man was inherently evil. The white man was the devil. And if the black man wanted to free himself and wanted to truly liberate himself, he would have to separate himself from the white man and all the white man's ways. The white man, according to the Nation of Islam, had imposed fornication, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, treachery, and all these type of things, these wicked behavior patterns on African Americans. And for African Americans to get on the right side of God, they had to abandon the white man's way and also had to abandon and separate from the white man and create their own country. Malcolm X often called out the hypocrisy of not only the civil rights movement, but the United States government. He called out the hypocrisy. And he gave this speech on November 10th, 1963, called A Message to the Grassroots. And he says in this speech, pretty much calling out the hypocrisy of the civil rights movement and calling out the hypocrisy of the United States government. Let me borrow your glasses, Caesar, real quick. Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? Land. Why did they want land? Independence. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. Number one, it was based on land. The basis of independence. And the only way they could get it was through bloodshed. Look at the French Revolution. What was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. Was no love lost. Was no compromise. Was no negotiation. I'm telling you, you don't know what a revolution is. Because when you find out what it is, you'll get back in the alley. You'll get out the way. Look at the Russian Revolution. What was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did it bring it about? Bloodshed. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. As long as a white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us, but it's true. How you gonna be non-violent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being non-violent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered? But at the same time, you're going to get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know. If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. And if it is right to be violent abroad in defense of America, and then it is right to do whatever is necessary right here in this country to defend our own people. Malcolm X, 1960.
By the way, the church that was bombed, the 16th Street Baptist Church, these are the shards of glass from it.
Oh, wow.
Where those 4 little girls were killed, here are them and their names right here. He mentioned this with the image.
Yes.
You remember